All right, so I'm just going to go over the next couple of slides quite quickly, actually, because I think we've touched on this already. But I don't know if people have seen Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, a lot of people have, and we view it in different ways. And we know that we all have these needs in our lives. Physiological needs, security and safety, love and belonging, self-esteem and self-actualisation. But in fact, what we tend to do quite well actually in terms of supporting people, particularly if they've got a disability, is physiological needs. And we do this reasonably well in terms of love and belonging, security and safety. And often, I guess I'm not so much talking to parents when I'm talking about this. Often it's the other people surrounding people in their support network, is that can be interpreted very differently. So in terms of behaviour and going back to how our brain works, what we know from neuroscience, in fact, is that in order for us to activate that part of our brain here and for our brain to be in a calm state, is that our brain actually drives us to do things to control our environment so that things are predictable and we feel safe and secure. And when that's not the case, then we will get really highly agitated. Not always highly, actually. It can actually just be a subtle thing and then tip over. Love and belonging is an interesting one in terms of behaviour. Is that often we see behaviour as something which is somebody saying they don't like you, or, you know, there's that interpretation that they're doing this and for other sort of reasons. But often in terms of behaviour, what people really need is that's really strong connections with other people. And what we find is, in fact, a lot of the drivers of behaviour is to connect and develop relationships with other people. It's an innate, strong desire. We are wired to develop relationships. We are born with a need to have strong attachments to other people. And in fact, that's the biggest driver that we have in terms of our behaviour a lot of the time. So that's one of the things that we often look for as a first thing in terms of understanding behaviour, is that what is that person telling us in terms of their connections? And look, this is an automatic thing. This isn't something which is conscious. It's an unconscious thing for us to connect with other people. It can look very different for different people though. Okay, for some kids, they have difficulty socially engaging with other people. Okay, because of their genetic makeup and just who they are as an individual or personality or whatever, is they may actually find it difficult to socially engage with other people. It doesn't mean they don't have the need for it. It's just difficult for them. And that's a really important message to think about. So sometimes when people say people with autism don't want to socially connect, it's not true. Absolutely do. But because of the way that they process relationships and process the environment around them, it's difficult for them to do that in a way that we might make sense of it ourselves and how easy it is for us. It's hard for them. Doesn't mean they don't need it. Okay, or that they're not seeking it. They absolutely are. So we just move on. So what I guess we've been talking about is that, you know, we started off with the behaviour and what we see, but we need to take a step away from that and reflect on actually what's happening for that person that's led them to communicate that. And that the environment and uniqueness about that person creates, I guess, some underlying needs which have influenced this dysregulation for people, the same as us. So when there are things happening in our environment that causes us to feel out of control, that our predictability, that I guess our connections are not happening as well, then we start to feel dysregulated. So think about the people that you have really good relationships with and good connections with them, are they the people that you feel the calmest with? Are they the people that you feel well, that you feel healthy with? Or the people that that you're not, have as good a relationship with, or you don't interact with as much? Do you find that you have that physical sort of stress levels which are a little bit different to somebody else? So I guess what we're talking about here is some underlying needs and influences are really observable, that there are triggers in your environment, such as lighting, things like that, which you think, that's a trigger for that person in terms of their needs. But there are some subtle things which are everyday, which just put people in a state of discomfort about how their needs are met on a daily basis. And that's, I guess, when we're talking about sensory and how we meet people's needs for connection and predictability. If those things are difficult on an everyday basis, then that person is always on edge. So it's easy then for those other triggers, such as lighting or seeing something which threatens them, to tip them over the edge. So we're talking about two levels really there in terms of unmet needs. So just to reflect, when we go back to, don't go back to the diagram, but with that diagram, initially when we just focus on the behaviour itself, our automatic thoughts are often about, well, you need to smarten up. Your behaviour needs to change, you need to get control of that behaviour. But I guess when we take a step back, when we start to review, in fact, this person, something's happening for that person, there are things that influence that, we then start to ask, what's up? What are you telling me? Doesn't mean it's easy to watch that behaviour and to sit with it and the discomfort of sitting with it, because I still have those thoughts about smarten up. I do all the time. It doesn't mean that that's wrong in terms of parenting to have those. But I guess what we need to do is catch hold of those thoughts and be able to also ask what's up. Because if we don't ask what's up, we're not going to be able to prevent the behaviour. We're just going to be reacting to it all the time. Okay, just seeing where we're at. Should I just keep talking? Okay. So you move on. Jackie, I might get you to help me with this one.
Sure.
Yeah. So, and I guess this is more of an acknowledgement, as I just said, is that it doesn't mean, why is it though? Why is it that it's hard sometimes to ask the what's up rather than the smarten up? Because as a parent, every one of us in this room, it's really confusing to know what to do. It's really confusing on an everyday basis to know how to respond to behaviours which are challenging, and for many, many reasons. One being, we come with a family history ourselves in terms of the way that we were parented, how our parents view behaviour management, etc. The influence, the opinions of other people in terms of, well, you should do this, you should do that. So we have constant conflicting messages all the time about what we should do in terms of managing behaviour. Then we've got well-meaning professionals such as ourselves, which you might get different messages and different opinions from them too, in terms of, well, you need to do that, you need to do that, you need to do that. And often we're very strategy-based. Well, you see the behaviour, you do that, that'll do that. Certainly a lot of behaviour intervention has done that over the years. Time out and lots, 1, 2, 3 magic and, things like that. And look, they actually might work for some people. There's no doubt about that. But all of those strategies don't actually address why that person was using the behaviour in the first place. It's just a reaction to the behaviour itself. Okay? So some kids, I guess, can respond to some kids do respond to those consequence-based things. But if you've got a child who's not, and they're actually struggling in terms of their anxiety, etc., it's just not going to work. It's not helping them. That's really what we're talking about here. And there's the need as a parent to have rules and boundaries. So how do we marry that with... So this gets, and I guess there's the other thing too, is that behaviour intervention has changed over the years. It wasn't so long ago that more consequence-based interventions were the right thing to do. They were. They were the evidence-based, that's the right thing to do. But we've got more knowledge now. And I think that's the difference. So therefore, when we've got that embedded with us, and that's what we've been taught. That's certainly the way that Craig and I were taught in terms of behaviour intervention. It's almost, for me, it's almost like an automatic thoughts that come in all the time in terms of, well, that person's doing that. Oh God, if I pay attention to that, will I be reinforcing? Will I actually be rewarding them for doing that? Blah, blah, blah. Will I actually be making that worse? Will I be, etc., because that's, I guess, what we've been taught. So that's why it's confusing for us. It's hard.
Yeah. I think really wanted to, I guess, firstly reinforce what Debbie was saying, in that whatever strategies we're using as parents, if they're working for us, then there's no judgment of that. We're only all here because the stuff we normally do isn't working with one of our family members. And I think it's been a really good learning curve for me in terms of my other kids, because I think my partner and I do tend towards that when they do things wrong, to go consequences. So like in our house, it's a technology ban for, increasing periods of time sometimes for certain behaviours. But what I've actually found is that with my kids that don't have a disability, that if I try actually talking to them first, we often don't need to go to that other place. And they've kind of got to this stage now, as sort of in their mid-teens, where they're coming to me and saying, I think I need some attention. Can we go and do something together? And the behaviours for them as well have decreased the more that we've learnt to spend more time with them and to talk to them more and connect with them more and talk more about what's going on for us in our lives. So I think it can work really well with everyone. But the other part of it is that we're also not saying that everything my son who has a disability does is always related to anxiety. I think he just can do naughty stuff, ordinary stuff sometimes too, and this is about being able to tell the difference. So I still tell him off for things, or not tell him off so much because he's 25, but we might have some heated discussions at times about things, and that's still okay. We're not talking about us all being perfectly zen all of the time, because that wouldn't be human or natural as well, I think.
Does anybody have any sort of reflections and comments about what we're talking about? Yeah.
When you deal with the Department of Protection and you're a foster carer, what you do is you can't just time out. You keep it for yourself. The law that says you can't touch them, you can't say anything. It's very hard to look after a child who is presenting a number of issues that the department won't even help out with, because they can, it's just a child, but the child can do whatever they want. And that's where the conflict of interest comes in. Now, I wish the Department of Protection member come here and listen to that, because that's where we help us manage the child.
And I guess that's what we're going to be talking about at the end of today, is where to from here in terms of how do we get the right supports around us to help us explore what support do we need to be able to work out what supports need to be put in place for our kids.
The partner may not like the way I handle the child, even though that's the way it's supposed to do it. You need to explain your therapy sessions or whatever it is to help calm the child out. The child needs an iPad so you can calm down. want to give you that.
Yeah. And look, we're going to talk in a minute about this issue of how professionals and families get onto the same page has been a huge part of the work we've been doing. So we'll have a talk about some things you can do about that in a second. That's okay. It's a really important issue.
Just really briefly, I sort of touched on this before, is that certainly when we're faced with behaviour which is particularly challenging, it's good for us to reflect what we tend to do. And this is a natural, very default thing that we tend to do. But if we're faced with something which I guess we're doing that, or not I guess, we're doing that escalation curve ourselves. But if we're faced with something which is really quite difficult for us and somewhat threatening to us at the time, what do we tend to do? We tend to pull away, don't we? For many different reasons. One is that, in a way, we're doing what we need in terms of helping ourselves calm, helping ourselves be in a place to manage our own stress levels. But at the other point, there could also be other reasons, such as we believe that if we don't pay attention to that behaviour too, that we won't be reinforcing it as well. They're all really good reasons, but we just need to be conscious of it, because going back to what we just talked about in terms of our innate need for connections, is that the more behaviour somebody engages in, we tend to pull away. What do you think then happens in terms of that person's needs?
Their anxiety escalates.
Their anxiety will probably escalate because their need for that connection has actually widened. They're going to have to amp it up to draw you back in. Even though it looks like they're pushing you away. And that's really hard actually, particularly for kids who are really verbal and can engage in those real strong arguments and, you know, swearing and carrying on and whatever. It actually looks like they're pushing you away. But in fact, what they're really saying is, I need help to calm down. I can't self-regulate myself. I actually need your help. It's almost the opposite to what we were taught, isn't it?
It also goes the other way a bit as well, in the way that you react to the child. If you react with anger and, you know, you're understandably anxious and frustrated, then they see that as you pushing them away as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a threat to them, and it raises their anxiety as well. So you're absolutely right. But
and even if they don't feel like they want the help, they actually do. Because I used to give my son time out before all this. And of course, I didn't realise that was what I wanted to do because his anxiety levels were building up. So she said, even though he seems like he's pushing you away, he actually wants you to, you know, deal with it. So we would still put him in the room, but we'd count to 5 seconds, go in, would you like some help? And sometimes he'd come out and go to attack me, so we'd shut the door, wait another 5 seconds, go in, and we'd continue to do this until he was settled down enough so we could actually talk to him and say, okay, well, what was wrong? And that would, sometimes you'd have to go, it'd be an hour going in there all the time until he would actually come down, and all that anxiety and that would lessen and lessen and lessen. And now we don't have to do that whole putting him in that room now, and you know, he's a lot less aggression, because he knows, oh, okay, she's going to come back in a minute, so I'm coming down a lot more, and so it's lessen now. So even though they don't seem to want that help, they
actually do. And I guess that co-regulation, or that ability to help children calm, will be different for every child. So for some children, they might need a little bit of space to help them calm, and that's almost self-selective because it helps them calm. Other children, and this is where the research actually suggests more now, which is actually staying present with children to help them calm, to help them co-regulate, to get them back into a place where we can now sort this through. Because as we talked about in the brain stuff before, There's absolutely no way that you can address that behaviour and that person's in a distressed place. So absolutely no way. So the goal isn't about managing the behaviour, it's about getting them to a calm place. Then if you need to have a discussion about it, have the discussion then. Or put in place strategies to try and prevent it next time.
We've started trying to change our dialogue rather than sort of correcting, what are you doing, blah, blah, blah. Sort of changing it around, saying, I can see that you're really sad, and trying to sort of open up, like to give them sort of maybe a feeling, or like, yeah, I can see you're really sad, what can we do? How can I help you to get through this? And that really changed. We don't do it all the time, but if we do it 50% of the time, it works really well. Just sort of opening that up rather than saying, settle down, don't be naughty, blah, blah, blah. Just saying, I can see you're really angry, or I can see you're really sad, how are you feeling, what can we do to fix this? And then it sort of breaks that cycle almost, because they have to sort of reset and think, oh, okay, yeah, I am sad. This might be what I need. I might need a hug or something like that.
Yeah. So what you're actually talking about is some, I guess, a lot of brain-based behaviour management, which is quite research-based at the moment, which is going back to that model, is acknowledging that if we actually go in with helping that person process their emotions, we're activating this part of the brain, which helps them then connect it together, and they can then take more of a control over what's happening in here, as opposed to when we're quite reactionary to the behaviour, we're feeding what's happening in here. So that's what you're talking about there, is how do we help that child make sense and activate that part.
Vocabulary to explain their emotions.
They don't.
We try and give that to them. And
Yeah.
they're using the only vocabulary they know.
Yeah.
Which might be attacking other people or being destructive.
Yeah, so you're doing skill-based stuff is actually helping them develop skills to do something different. But they need the development of those skills to do something different. How can we expect them not to?
I was just going to say, that's a really nice example there of something we call scaffolding, which is the support we provide around a person to help them navigate their environment. That's a beautiful example there of, actually, first of all, providing them the support to regulate so they can start to get re-engage the frontal part of their brains, and then give them another language or some more words to describe what might be happening for them in terms of being able to label some of their feelings, which over time can help give them a framework that they can start to use themselves to maybe talk earlier before they become overwhelmed around what's happening.
So just to finish, what you're talking about here is we actually need to lean in. It's hard to do. Sometimes we need space ourselves to be able to take ourselves away and then come back and reconnect. It doesn't mean that we stay connected when we're in a state of stress ourselves, but it means we need to reconnect. We need to meet people's needs for that social connection to help them be in a place of calmness and wellness. I'll leave it at that.
I've got 2 boys, 13, which is an issue in itself, and 11. An 11-year-old has sensory issues. And since they were babies, both of them, I sing every night to them, nursery songs, nursery rhymes. And the 13-year-old still likes me to sing nursery rhymes to him every night. But I found when I had an argument with the 11-year-old, when something happened and something blew up, and he went to bed angry, and then I was really angry, I was in the red zone, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't come in and sing. I'm not going to sing. I don't want to sing. And I've looked back and I've realised that on those nights, he would wake up, like I'd hear him in the middle of the night screaming in his sleep. And I'd go, oh my God, what's wrong? Anyway, what I've noticed is that if I can calm down enough when he's gone to bed, and I have to take 5 or 10 minutes, normally they sleep within a few minutes of going to bed. They're very good sleepers. But on the nights where he's had an argument and he's gone to bed really upset, he's not asleep within 5 or 10 minutes. So it gives me 10 minutes to calm myself down. And I go in there and I have to put all effort into singing to him. And I'll sing, and then there's this silly little song that I sing every now and then. It makes him laugh. And then he goes to sleep within a few minutes, and there's no screaming through the night, there's no crying, there's no waking. And it's only when you've been doing this and going, oh, that's what I'm doing, and I didn't even realise. But it took a long time to get there for me to go, okay, Karen, calm yourself down and get in there and sing to him, because that's partly routine. I think it's just a routine of what we've done for 11 years, and also getting him into that relaxed, calming state. So it's two things being done in there. And I didn't realise until you've put those words up there, go, oh, that's what I'm doing. I better make sure I do it every time. But sometimes it takes a lot to calm yourself down to get back in there.
Sometimes it does, absolutely. And sometimes you might actually need to tag team it. Sometimes you might actually need to get your partner to be the person who reconnects because you're not in a place that you can. And that's okay.
Well, it's only the me, so that's...
Yeah. Or whatever it works for, in different families. But I think it's a lovely example. It's a really lovely example of what this is really signifying. And look, a lot of the things we're talking about today is not rocket science, and it may resonate, you may know a lot of this stuff. But what we're talking about is bringing it into the consciousness, is that if we can be really almost more clearer about what we're doing and what we need to do and where we need to put our focus, it makes it a lot easier for us in terms of what we're observing, how to work out what our supports need to be, etc., etc.
And I'd like to just add to that, sorry, just one sec, is it's about being curious, as Deb said, but I think it's also about being really kind to ourselves. We're hearing lots of reflections today about, things aren't perfect and how we get things back on track. But one of the things that helps us do that is by being kind to ourselves. We're not perfect, and these are really hard situations. We have our own crisis cycle. But if we reflect on that, we give ourselves that chance to get back on track and then get back to being curious and trying to understand what's happening for a person.
Chloe have been using these strategies, and as they escalate, you escalate, and then there's no reasoning. But that behaviour was not appropriate, so you try not to address it at the time. But then if you go back the next day or a couple of hours later and say, look, what happened then wasn't really appropriate, well then you're back up to escalation point, and you think, well, how do I teach you that that's not the right thing? Because when I do it when you're calm, you're back into angry again. It's hard.
It is hard, and obviously we can't give solutions to people without knowing people's stories within this context. I think just from your something from your example there is that it is actually really hard to know what to do when you actually bring up the discussion. What we do know now, though, is that when you actually can talk about it outside of the event, it does help kids sort through, but I guess it's how we approach it. So I guess going back to your example of if we approach it in terms of curiosity about what was happening for you, how were you angry at the time, acknowledging what was happening and not going in from, you need to change, and helping them sort through what they could do differently is, I guess, a different approach. You know what I mean? So I think and it takes a bit of, it actually is really hard to do, I have to say, but it is.
Every way, I think, and it goes against human nature and common experience and the things people tell us, in the street, and the advice we're often given. But I think our experience and the work we've done has really taught us that there are opportunities to think about, well, what else is needed to scaffold and support that person so they can do what they need to do and not engage in that behaviour. And it is from coming in from that point of view of how do we support that to happen that tends to help it happen.
Can I say something? I'm just going to tell you a bit about us and that, so I'm not presuming anything about you, okay? But I think for us there's a couple of things. So the first thing was understanding that, so having that strong reaction could be about some shame about the behaviour. So if we go back to talk about the behaviour and they're feeling ashamed or guilty about it, it just brings all of that back. And the way that we've kind of dealt with that is, on the one hand, to actually spend a bit more time building up my son's self-esteem so he knows that he's loved and not judged because of his behaviour, and that it's actually okay and we're all in this together. And the other conversation we have with him, because he won't talk directly to us about it, is to just start talking about ourselves. So I'll say, sometimes when I feel stressed, I do this, and I feel really bad about it when I do that. And just so it's not just about them, sometimes, or just observing other people around can make it easier to talk about okay and not okay ways of responding when you're feeling, if that makes sense. So it's just, I know for my son, if the attention's all on him, then we're gone, we're never going to get there, whereas we can talk about other people and it feels safer, if that makes sense. Yeah.